Welcome to The Explainer. Today we're diving into a hobby that feels like it's straight out of a spy movie, but is actually happening in backyards all over the world. We're talking about amateur radio satellites.
Seriously? Think about that for a second. It sounds like pure science fiction, right? But for a really dedicated global community, it is an everyday reality. We're going to explore this incredible hobby that connects regular people on the ground with a whole fleet of spacecraft whizzing hundreds of miles above our heads.
And this is what's so wild. You don't need a giant dish or some secret mission control center. We're talking about equipment you can literally hold in your hands to make contact. So how on earth does that even work?
To get our heads around this, we need to think of these satellites less like a complex NASA spacecraft and more like something that pretty much every ham radio operator is already familiar with. Yep, at their very core, these satellites, which operators lovingly call birds, are basically just repeaters that happen to be in orbit. They catch a signal you send up from Earth and just throw it right back down.
The piece of hardware that makes this happen is called a transponder. It listens for a signal on one frequency, that's called the uplink, gives it a little power boost, and then retransmits it on a completely different frequency, the downlink. People often call it a bent pipe system because it just relays the signal without doing anything fancy to it.
Okay, so you're probably wondering who is putting all this incredible hardware into space. I mean, it's got to be some big government agency, right? Well, the answer is actually way more impressive than that.
For the most part, this is the work of AMSAT. It's a global volunteer group of amateur radio operators, hams, and they have been the absolute driving force behind this hobby for more than 50 years.
And their history is just amazing. It started with something called Project Oscar way back in 1961. These volunteers just kept pushing the envelope. I mean, get this, the legendary Oscar 7, launched in 1974, is still partially working today. And since then, over 100 satellites have earned that prestigious Oscar name, which, by the way, stands for Orbiting Satellite Carrying Amateur Radio.
This right here is the result of all that passion. AMSAT works with space agencies and universities to get their often homebrew satellites hitched on a rocket and sent into orbit. It's just proof of what dedicated volunteers can pull off.
All right, so what does it actually take to get on the air and talk to one of these birds? Let's break down the gear you're going to need.
First off, don't let all this talk of space and satellites intimidate you. The really great news is that you can get started with some pretty basic equipment, some of which you might already have, or, in the true spirit of the hobby, you can build it yourself.
Now, you have to remember, these satellites are transmitting with very, very low power. We're talking just a watt or two. This means your success hinges almost entirely on one thing, your antenna. It is, without a doubt, the single most important piece of your station.
So you could go with a popular commercial antenna like the Arrow, or you can fully embrace the DIY spirit of the hobby and build one yourself. That antenna on the right, the cheap Leo, is literally made from wood, wire, and welding rods. And guess what? It's just as effective.
Now, for a fixed station at your house, a really popular design is the egg beater antenna. And that unique shape, well, that's the whole key to how it works.
See, the egg beater is omnidirectional, and it uses something called circular polarization. What that does is help minimize the signal fading as the satellite tumbles around in orbit. And it means you don't need some complex, expensive rotator system to track it as it moves across the sky.
And the best part? The design is based on some pretty simple, accessible math. This just perfectly captures the spirit of amateur radio, where enthusiasts can build their own high-performance gear right from scratch.
Of course, having a great antenna is really only half the battle. You also need to know exactly where to point it and when.
And to do that, you need something called Keplerian elements, or just KEPs for short. This is basically a set of orbital data that you feed into tracking software. The software then does all the heavy lifting and predicts the satellite's precise path over your location, telling you exactly where to aim your antenna. Now, communicating with an object that's screaming along at over 17,000 miles per hour, it's not exactly simple. It introduces some really unique physics and, well, it requires a specific code of conduct.
The biggest challenge is something called the Doppler effect. You know how the pitch of a train whistle or a siren changes as it passes you? It sounds higher as it's coming towards you and lower as it moves away. It's the exact same principle here.
This makes a satellite pass, which only lasts about 10 to 15 minutes, a really active experience.
Operators are constantly, and I mean constantly, fine-tuning their radio's frequency to stay locked onto that shifting signal. It's like this real-time dance with physics.
And since everyone is sharing this one limited resource, there's a pretty clear etiquette. The golden rules are: use the minimum power you need, listen to make sure you're actually being heard, and respect each satellite's operating mode. Using the wrong mode can totally overwhelm the satellite's sensitive receiver, and that is a major, major party foul.
Okay, now let's see how this all comes together and meet a few of the amazing birds that are actually in orbit right now.
First up, this is a piece of living history, AMSAT Oscar 7. It was launched way back in 1974, but its batteries failed in 1981. Everyone thought it was totally lost. Then, 21 years later, it just mysteriously came back to life. It's this amazing story of resilience, and it still operates today whenever its solar panels are getting hit by sunlight.
And in complete contrast, you have the modern CubeSats, like the AMSAT Fox series. These things pack incredibly advanced technology into a tiny, standardized frame that really represent the cutting edge of amateur satellite design.
And this hobby is truly global. Satellites like the CAS series from China really show the international collaboration that defines this whole community. You've got groups from all over the world contributing to the fleet that's flying over our heads.
So you go from home-built antennas in the garage to being part of a global community that launches its own spacecraft. The world of amateur satellites is where science, engineering, and human connection all meet up in orbit. It's a frontier that is accessible to absolutely everyone. Which really just leaves one question.